But as much as we need to have a roster of stories in our minds that we can share with others, different tools that we can draw on in the right moments with the Holy Spirit's inspirations, you might forget a particular story, but then when you're in conversation, something will come to mind and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to share this with this person. It's important to remember, not only do we need to share stories, but we need to be willing to receive stories. We need to be willing to hear the story of another. When I tell the stories that I've told you today, they're often in two settings. One setting would be something like this, whether I'm talking to a larger group like this or a small group, maybe a handful of teenagers after a high school talk. Another setting would be in a one-on-one conversation where we're just discussing and debating the ethics of abortion, much like as happens with the summer campaign, hopefully you'll all sign up for, Project Truth. But there is a time when I don't draw on these stories. And the time I don't draw on the stories is when the person begins to tell me their story. When they bring up that they've had an abortion, or that they were raped, or that they grew up in abject poverty, and when they start to reveal something about themselves, or that my mom had this happen to her, or my sister had this happen to her, but there's a revealing of someone else's story, I actually set my stories aside. And I listen to theirs and I say, how is your mom doing? Or how are you doing? What would you like me to understand as we've debated all this time and you've now shared this with me? How can I help you? What do you best need right now? And it's a setting aside of our stories to receive theirs. Another time I might set aside my stories is when I haven't yet been told their story, but I'm starting to sense they have one. So I'll have lots of conversations, very intellectual, we're going back and forth, but every now and then there comes a point where I can't seem to get through to this person, and I think, man, I've got some pretty amazing stories to tell you. Why isn't this resonating? And it's not that they've told me they're coming from a place of pain, but if I can't get through to them, I start to wonder if they are, if they're coming from a place of pain. And although I don't ask directly, I often ask indirectly, things like, I'm curious, where does your passion come from? Or I'm curious, do you know anyone who's had an experience with what we're talking about? Or I'm wondering, when did you first learn about abortion and what did you think then? And did your opinion change? Oh, when did it change? Why? And as they start to answer those questions, that might be when they start to indicate they're coming from a place of direct or indirect experience. And that tells me it's time to set aside my stories and listen to theirs. And I want to really hit this point home by playing for you one more video clip. It's of a dialogue that happened on a college campus, and it's an example of what not to do. Because this conversation and leads to other conversations, this conversation happens in a setting where one of the participants revealed her story. And rather than those who heard it, sitting with it and having empathy and compassion, they decided to keep going forward on their mission. So let's take a look.
And you can't say.
I'm not trying to say I do. I'm not trying to say I do.
You're trying to say the choice that I made was incorrect because there was another choice that for some reason looks better to you. This reason being God.
It doesn't look better at first, but you have to look past the pain, you have to look past the suffering, you have to look past it.
Right, so I have years of suffering to look forward to if I had made that other choice. So I have the rest of my life suffering.
You're looking at the suffering all by itself. And you're looking, and
suffering
again,
does that to you.
And looking,
when you have a lot of suffering, it's not like it stays on the side. It's usually right in front of your face.
It is, and it's hard. But you're always looking at yourself in this situation. You have not thought once about that baby and how
I
you didn't
was
get a chance
a
to
baby
live.
at that age.
You were 13.
Yes, I was.
That's not a baby.
I'm sorry, I was a teenager. Does that make you feel better?
No, it doesn't.
Would it have been better if I was 5 when it happened, so I could actually tell you that I was more babyish?
You wouldn't have gotten pregnant.
I wouldn't have gotten pregnant if I wasn't raped.
Well, okay, but I mean, the point is you guys are getting off on all kinds of different tangents. The bottom line is it's not right to kill unborn children, regardless of any of the
It's
other
not
issues you
killing.
bring up.
It's a surgical
Oh, yes,
procedure
it is.
to remove cells.
Well, it's alive when you start, it's dead when you stop. Then what is
It's
it?
not alive on its own. It's alive in my body.
So,
It can't live without
The
me,
point is-
so therefore it's up to me to make that choice.
wrong. It's an individual human being. It's an individual.
It's not an individual human being
Wait a
because it
minute,
doesn't
wait a
have its
minute.
own
Whose
lungs,
DNA
brain.
does it have?
It has a combination.
No. It has its own individual DNA. It's not your DNA. If it were your DNA, then it would be your body.
It has a combination of the mother and the father.
Right, so you're saying it's different than yours, right?
I don't really give a rat's ass about
But
the
that's
DNA
the whole
and
crux of
fetus.
the issue.
No, the crux of
See,
the
everybody's
issue
saying, is it
is that there are
is it a
reasons people make
choice?
choices.
Choice
There's a
to do
reason
what you
people
want to
make
do with
choices.
your own body, right?
And you're saying that the reason they have is just complete crap. That there's never a reason to do this. And I'm telling you, I am a living example of why abortions should be legal, of why abortions should be available to any woman who needs them, so she can live her life.
Those are all wonderful points, but it's still wrong to kill unborn human beings.
Who says it's wrong?
Oh, I do.
And?
And
What
most
is-
of these other people do.
Right, and I bet you those people in this camp would agree
Right,
with me.
but see, they don't understand. See, they're saying that it's a woman's choice to do what she wants to do with her own body. Right? Well, I agree. But an unborn fetus is not your body. It has different DNA than you. See, if it were your body,
Not
every
my
person
body.
has
It's just
DNA.
living in my womb,
Well,
right?
just
Is
listen
it
to-
renting out a room for
Listen
me?
to my one point. Every person has DNA in their body, and the DNA is identical from cell to cell. I was taught that in biology class here at campus.
Fantastic.
So if it's your body, it'll have your DNA. If it's somebody else's body, it'll have different DNA. That's a biological fact.
Why do you care so much about DNA?
Why do you care so much about DNA? If we pause and remember what I said at the beginning and we ask ourselves, what are they communicating but not verbalizing? What she was really saying is, why don't you care about me? Because the guys lost sight of the person in front of them. The way some people in the care home lost sight of the person of Martin in front of them. And the way many people in our culture lose sight of the baby in the womb. And we need the eyes to see and the courage to advocate for the baby in the womb. But we also need the eyes to see the person right in front of us. And we need the wisdom and discernment to know when to set aside our stories in order to sit with them in theirs. Because at the end of the day, the pro-life goal is not merely to win an argument, but to also win the person we're arguing with. And very sadly, that young woman got lost by that crowd. I'd like to wrap everything up, ending where I began in reference to Martin Pistorius. In one of his radio interviews, he said, "I think being seen and having another person validate your existence is incredibly important." And so it's my hope that at the end of the day, your takeaway from this presentation is that you see and validate not only the preborn child through the stories you tell advocating for them, but you see and validate the born person whose stories you receive. Thank you very much. Just a little touch and it comes on.
Thank you for the talk, very enlightening. Just perhaps to drop on the video that you showed at the end, just like a further question on it. I thought that the gentleman at the end was actually quite, thoughtful, and that his reasoning was quite sound, and perhaps
The gentleman at the end, you're saying the overweight man, the older man, or you mean the young boy?
Slightly overweight.
Okay, oh, slightly, okay, sorry. Hope he's not watching.
So my only thought was, how would you balance the need to tell people who are perhaps brainwashed by the secular worldview around them that, well, killing your child is wrong. And how do you balance that with being loving and compassionate towards them?
Good question.
Because as far as I could tell, and my experience, as a young man might not be the same as that young student, but my reaction to the video was, well, that was actually quite a thoughtful response. So perhaps if you could unpack a bit more what you mean by how he could have been better.
Sure, yeah, good question. So when he was coming back about the DNA and, it's not your body, it's someone, it's the parent's body, on a technical level, he's right insofar as making the claim that the preborn child is a separate entity from the mom. Where he was wrong was not so much in his content, but his choice of delivering that content. That the moment someone reveals they have gone through a serious trauma and are already showing themselves to not be listening, you're wasting your breath walking down a logical path. Because their issue is not an issue of the head, it's an issue of the heart. Had I been in this conversation and she had not yet revealed that she had gotten pregnant from rape, and we were early on in the conversation, and I didn't know anything personal about her, yeah, I would have talked about DNA, I would have talked about human rights, I would have talked about the preborn child being human because the parents are, living because the embryo's growing. But the moment we're going round and round and getting nowhere, or the moment she so explicitly reveals, what that tells me is I'm not getting through to her because she needs to be validated for who she is as a human, and that what happened to her was a terrible thing. And until she's properly processed her trauma, I don't even think she's going to accept this conclusion. Now, I'm not a counselor, so I'm not going to try to pretend to be one, but I can be a sympathetic, empathetic Christian. So what I would have done in the moment of reveal would have been to say, I am so sorry for what you went through. How are you doing? In one conversation I had with a woman who revealed, I said to her, do you feel safer as the person who hurt you still in your life? So even if you're not dealing with a minor, taking it upon yourself to be concerned for their safety, could she be victimized again? Has this been properly reported? And then another question would be, do you feel you've gotten adequate counseling? Could I help connect you to a place? Is there something that I could do? Another thing, if the person was maybe kind of a little antsy towards me because of my pro-life views that had previously been revealed before they shared their personal story, I would have said, what? And you could say this differently and it come across differently, so you have to say it very gently. What does someone who thinks like you want someone who thinks like me to understand? Or what does someone who's had your experience, what do you, rather, who's had your experience, want me, I'll be honest, who hasn't had your experience, to understand? So I would set aside all head intellectual stuff and just meet them on a compassionate, empathetic level. And then to give you another example, if we were in a courtroom, that first guy would have been a great lawyer catching her in a technicality. Or the first guy, because he said, I was a baby, and he said, you weren't a baby, you were 13. Okay, well, if you're in a courtroom, great. Catch her on a technicality. That is not what you say to someone in conversation who's revealed that she has been brutalized and overpowered and hurt in the most despicable way. All she needed was not to be called out on that she wasn't baby enough, and just wrapped in empathy and compassion. One thing I would just say too, if it's man versus woman, also, she may not be wanting to talk too much, so then it's really just an expression of sympathy. I'm sorry for all you've gone through. I wouldn't recommend like a man touching her arm or anything. Even for women, what I typically do when someone begins to get emotional with me, whether they're pro-life or pro-abortion, is I say, may I hug you? Are you okay if I put my hand on your arm? Because we don't know what that person's story is and what kind of touch, even if it's same-sex touch, will make them feel. So even for the women in the room, I always ask, is it okay if I hug you? Do you want to sit down? Can I put my hand on your shoulder? Yeah, I'm around the rest of the weekend, so I'm happy to talk. Thank you.